Satnam everyone, welcome back to the Aquarian Shift. My name is Jason Diltz, also known as Tega Kuldeep, and in this video I am going to be talking about the Yuga cycles, specifically the Kali Yuga and how we are exiting the Kali Yuga in 2025, in fact in just a couple of months. So I'm going to talk about what a Yuga is, what that cycle of time means, and what it means to be alive during a Yuga shift, especially as the Kali Yuga comes to an end this year. I'm also going to talk about how this ties into the age of Aquarius, and I'm going to share a really important mantra that is going to help us get through these really intense times that we're experiencing right now, and that we're going to continue to experience for the next bit of time. And we are facing some really intense situations right now. I live in Los Angeles, and this has been a really difficult week for the city that I live in. A lot of you have reached out and asked how I'm doing. I am fine. I'm thankful and grateful to be fine. I live far enough away from where the fires are happening that I'm not in any real danger of needing to evacuate. But while I am physically fine, I feel the destruction that is around us, and my heart aches for all of the people that have lost their homes, and some have lost their lives. Just in my Sangat at Nine Treasures, I'm aware of 6 people who have lost everything. Their homes are no longer there. And you can see the fires. If you just get to a point of elevation in this city, you'll see the smoke. And the winds are picking up. I'm filming this on Monday the 13th, and we're not sure what's going to happen this week. So please continue to keep Los Angeles in your prayers. Please continue to chant mantras. Please send all the love and the good energy that you can, because this city really needs it right now. And the reason I'm doing this video about the Kali Yuga is actually very timely in some really uncomfortable ways. What I'm going to talk about is largely based on the book Yuga Shift by Bibhu Dev Misra, which I have talked about in other videos. I highly recommend that you get this book, that you read this book, because if you want to understand what's going on right now and what we're going to be facing, he does a really good job of laying out the history, laying out the science, and presenting, I think, a pretty convincing case for why we're reaching the end of the Kali Yuga. So, first of all, what is a Yuga? This is the Aquarian Shift. So on this channel, I mostly talk about time as measured through astrological ages, which last about 2,150 years. Yuga cycles last a lot longer. The key to understanding Yuga cycles is to recognize that consciousness and our advancement as a civilization goes through cycles of ascension, where the consciousness is rising, where the virtue is rising, where we're moving forward collectively. And then it goes through cycles of descension, where the consciousness is lower, where the virtue is in decline, and where our capabilities and our abilities are gradually and slowly declining. We have been in a cycle of descension. Our consciousness has been descending for many, many thousands of years. And that's what is about to end. So that's the good news. The good news is the descension is about to end. Essentially, a yuga, if you want to put a definition around it, is a cosmic measurement of time that time codes how we are ascending and how we are descending on a collective level. So I'm going to talk about the 4 types of yugas that happen along through time. I'm going to give you some dates for those, and then I'll dive a little bit deeper into that from there. So, as I've said many times on this channel, evolution is time-coded. All of the experiences that we have are coded in the passage of time. And when we reach a certain point in time, we have a certain experience and we grow in a certain way, or at least the opportunity is there for us to grow in a certain way. That's true individually. That's very true collectively. So at a certain point, the consciousness reaches a height, and that's called the Golden Age. And we call this the Sat Yuga. And during the Golden Age, there's pure truth, there's enlightenment, there's harmony. Humanity is spiritually advanced and it's connected to its divinity. We live longer. We have stronger bone structures. We're taller. Everything about life is larger and it's more harmonious, and we're more in connection with the divine. And the Golden Age, the Sat Yuga, is thought to be the time when the civilization of Atlantis was at its height, and when the Atlantean civilization was really in its heyday. This idea of yugas happens in a period when you're talking about the Sat Yugas and all the different ones of ascending and descending. So there was a period of time when the consciousness was ascending, and then it reached a pinnacle, and then it started to descend. So the descending Sat Yuga, when consciousness had reached a pinnacle and then very, very slowly started to gradually decline, that lasted from about 13,560 BC to 10,876 BC. Then we had an event that is known as the cataclysmos, or the deluge, and this is destruction by water. This was a transition period out of the Sat Yuga and into the next Yuga, which would be the Tetra Yuga. But before we got to the Treta Yuga. But before we got to the Treta Yuga, we had to go through a transition period. And this last transition period that we had was a transition by water. This was a time when we had a lot of localized floods. This is probably what the Noah's Ark flood story in the Bible is about, the Gilgamesh epic, the flood that's mentioned in there, and then many of the other floods, myths, and legends that exist across different cultures. They are most likely referring to this deluge that occurred from around 10,876 to 9,676 BC. This period is often referred to as the Younger Dryas. This is when you had a very rapid and sudden melting of the glaciers, and all of a sudden there was just mass water, and that water took out civilizations. It's thought that during this deluge, this is when Atlantis fell and it was sunk under the sea. Bibhu Dev Misra talks a lot in his book about what brings on these cataclysms, and he relates a lot of this to comets. And I'm not going to go into all of the research that he did because I want you to read the book because he explains it a lot better than I can, but essentially there was a series of comets that came and they brought about certain destructions or cleansings, if you want to look at it that way, because what this is this is purging out certain energies that are no longer aligned with where the frequency of the planet is heading for the next bit of history. So the cataclysmos was a deluge of destruction by water. And when that was over, we collectively entered the Treta Yuga, which is the Silver Age. And during the Silver Age, there's a decline in spiritual purity, but we're still guided by higher wisdom and Dharma. So during this period, there was still a connection to Source that was more naturally available and that was more naturally in the collective understanding of existing and being. And this Silver Era, this Treta Yuga, it lasted from 9,676 BC to 6,976 BC. Then we had 300 years of transition out of this Silver Age and into the next age, the Bronze Age. The Bronze Age is the Dwapara Yuga. During the Bronze Age, there's a rise in materialism and energy consciousness. People are aware of subtle forces, but they begin to lose their spiritual balance. There becomes more of a focus on the things that we can make and the way that we can harness energy for ourselves. And as we focus on that, we become less connected to the source of energy, to the divine. And it's during this Bronze Age that we really began to build civilization, or at least the foundation of civilization as we know it. This was 6,676 BC to 3,976 BC. Incidentally, and this is not something that Bibhu talks about in the book, but this is also the period when the matriarchy gave way to the patriarchy and was basically the female, feminine, natural law dominated order that had existed became the patriarchy, more masculine, male energy focus that we've all been living under ever since. And this happened, Jeffrey Wolf Green talks about this a lot in evolutionary astrology. This was about 6500 BC, which makes sense if you're thinking about the way that disconnected us from natural law and the natural order of things. It makes sense that would happen during a Bronze Age when the consciousness is starting to decline. And of course, the way that patriarchy came about, masculine energy is awesome and it's needed, and we need divine masculine energy on this planet, but we don't need it at the expense of the feminine. And unfortunately, a lot of what's played out ever since then has been a lot of the domination submission type of energy, and this all came about during the Dwapara Yuga. So after 3,960 BC, we again entered another 300-year transition period. And when that period was over, we entered the Kali Yuga, which is the age of iron. This is the age of darkness. This is the age of disconnection and material obsession. This is where spiritual truth is obscured. This is where your connection to source, your connection to the divine, your recognition of your own divinity is cut off. And we've existed in the Kali Yuga essentially since 3,976 BC. Now, what's interesting about the Kali Yuga is much like the Sat Yuga, the Golden Age, in the Bronze Age, in the Iron Age, the Kali Yuga that we're in now, there is a descending period, there's a transition, and then there's an ascending period. So the descending period of the Kali Yuga was 3,676 to 976 BC. Then we had a transition period, 976 to 676 BC. So that's putting us in the age of Aries right there. Then the consciousness started to ascend, and we began a gradual increase. So the ascending Kali Yuga, 676 BC to 2025 AD, aka the year that we're living in right now. The ascending Kali Yuga ends this year. It ends on the spring equinox that we have coming up in March 20th, 2025. That is the day that the Kali Yuga ends. Now, ascending Kali Yuga, 676 BC to 2025 AD, what were some things that were going on historically then? Well, the biggest advent in terms of consciousness and our connection to source was the advent and all of the teachings and writings and stories and controversies around Jesus Christ. That was around 0 or so AD. And that led us into the age of Pisces. So that this was when we had a way to start to reconnect with our spiritual source, but that was still grounded by a lot of the negative energies of the Kali Yuga. One of the traits of an ascending Kali Yuga is that the material wealth and the material gain and the resources of humanity will gradually increase, but the moral depravity and the consciousness will continue to decline. And we've definitely seen that for the last 2,000 years. No offense to anybody who is into organized religion, but the church as a structure and as an institution has been found again and again to be corrupt. That's a very ascending Kali Yuga trait. There's a increase in material wealth. People are giving their wealth, their fortune to the church, believing that they're doing so to get access to the divine, and there's a lot of corruption inherent in many of those church systems. And of course, the big lie is that God is outside of you, when in fact God is within you. And as we reach the end of the Kali Yuga, that's really the truth that is now emerging. I talked about it in the last video. God and me and God, we are one. That is a truth that has come back into the collective zeitgeist as we exit the Kali Yuga. And that is a truth that we really need to hold on to in our psyches, and we really need to implant into our cellular memory, because we're in for a pretty gnarly ride as we exit the Kali Yuga and we go through the next little bit of time. And that's what I'm going to talk about next. So, as I said in the beginning of the video, essentially at the time when Atlantis fell, there were mass floods. That was the deluge. We're at the polarity point of that zodiacally. So this was when the age of Leo was going on. We've now entered the polarity of that, which is the very early stages of the age of Aquarius. So according to the Yuga cycle, we will experience the polarity of that, which is something called ekpyrosis, or conflagration, and that is a purging and a destruction by fire that we will experience collectively from 2025 to 3225 AD. Now, I'm talking about what Bibhu Dev Misra wrote in his book. I do not believe that we are fated to have to experience 1,200 years of mass destruction and cataclysmic fires and a full-scale destruction of the human race by fire. Clearly, that is happening right now, or a version of that is happening right now. I live in Los Angeles. There are fires. There is destruction. There have been other cataclysms recently. I was in Asheville, North Carolina for Christmas. Is a city that did not experience fire, did experience a natural, experienced a natural disaster event via a hurricane, and there were a lot of floods. There's weather events happening all over the planet. It's not just Los Angeles. Los Angeles just happens to be in the news right now, and it happens to be about fire. There is also something really interesting going on this week in that there is a comet that has entered into our orbit, and it's a comet that hasn't been seen by the Earth for 160,000 years. I'm not going to go into what that comet means. Remington Donovan has a fantastic Patreon, and he dives deep into this. I highly recommend anybody interested in astrology, numerology, cosmology, or if you're just interested in what this comet is all about, go to his Patreon and sign up. It's very affordable, and he gives a really good deep dive into this. But what I found interesting about him bringing this comet up is that Bibhu, in his book, he talks about comets being part of what brings the purging and the cleansing during these transition periods. And we have a 1,200-year transition period when the Sat Yuga ends and we go into the Treta Yuga, from the gold to the silver. We have the same 1,200-year period when the Kali Yuga ends, and we're ascending from the iron to the bronze. So we've got a little ways to go before we get to the Dwapara Yuga, the ascending Dwapara Yuga. That's going to be essentially during the age of Aquarius, going into the age of Capricorn, and we're almost going to be into the age of Sagittarius. That's the calendar years for that are 3,235 AD to 5,925 AD. So none of us are going to be here in our current states, but all of us will be here in other ways, or we'll be off planet somewhere helping in other ways. And that's why I did this video, and that's why I talk about these things, because, you know, evolution is time-coded, and we're all here to have a certain experience for a certain length of time, and then that experience ends, and we have a new experience in a new, different body, in a different time. So while some of this may not seem relevant, stuff that happened 10,000 years ago, stuff that's going to happen 3,000 years from now, it's actually incredibly relevant, because we're here as part of a collective journey. And we're at a time when the consciousness has to increase. That's the way out of the destruction. The way that we don't have 1,200 years of mass fires and the population being burned to the ground is we raise and we elevate our consciousness. And I'm watching this happen here in Los Angeles while all of this tragedy has happened, and while I can't even begin to speak to the depths of the emotions that people must be feeling after having lost everything. There has been an outpouring of support, an outpouring of love, just among the people that I know. I have witnessed just amazing selfless acts and just a huge heart opening. And every time we have a natural or unnatural disaster like we're having in Los Angeles right now with these fires, that is giving us collectively an opportunity to open our hearts, find the goodness that is within us, and bring that out into the world. And that's how the consciousness starts to gradually ascend. The idea behind the yugas is that there's this cow, and he has 4 legs. And when we're in the golden age, the Sat Yuga, he's standing on all 4 legs. And then when the virtue starts to decline, and we get to the Treta Yuga, the Silver Age, one of the legs gets chopped off, and he stands on 3 legs for the next 3,000 or so years. Then when we get to the Bronze Age, the Dwapara Yuga, 2nd leg is cut off, and the cow only stands on 2 legs for the next 3,000 years. Then we reach the Kali Yuga, yet another leg is cut off. And then for the next long duration of time, this poor cow stands on only 1 leg. And that's where we have been over the last many thousands of years. Because the consciousness has been so low, the virtue has been in such decline, and this poor cow has only been standing on 1 leg. Well, we're only 1,200 years away, according to Bibhu, when the cow gets one of his legs back. And over the next period of time, over the next many, many millenniums, eventually, he'll be back on all 4. What happens in that space? What happens over the next 1,200 years, the next many thousands of years? Ultimately, that depends on us. That depends on what we do in our daily lives, where we put our focus, and what we do to make this world better. You know, there's something really interesting that he talks about, and this intersects with some of the Yogi Bhajan teachings about time. Yogi Bhajan talked a lot about 2025 being an important year, a year when we would kind of be in the thick of the dark ages, and then we would gradually start to come out of it. And he talked about 2036 as being a year when the Aquarian consciousness would start to set in. Bibhu talks about the years 2029 through 2035, which is 7 years, possibly being what the Bible talked about when it referred to the tribulations in the book of Revelations. And if you look at the astrology, I can definitely see how that can match up, because the astrology of the 2030s definitely points to world wars or world conflicts. It definitely points to very trying global events. And then, of course, there's the book of Revelations that talks about the tribulations. And I myself am not a Christian. I am not somebody that puts a lot of stock necessarily in what the church has told us about the Bible, but these are texts, and there's truth inside these texts. It may just not be the truth that we have been told. So all of this is very interesting. The most important thing, though, and the message that I really want to make sure is understood is that we don't have to tie ourselves to any sort of fate. We are geomancers. We are the movers of time and space. And we have these yuga cycles, we have these astrological ages. These set conditions for how things can play out. But we're the actors, and we're the ones that decide on an individual level how things are going to play out in our own life. And then when we start to move our energy, that starts to move the collective energy. And that's really what I see the invitation as being right now. I do see the consciousness starting to rise. There's been a huge lack of moral clarity. There's been a no end of depravity for as long as I've been alive. But I see day by day some people choosing to live more virtuously, some people choosing to live more in alignment with their nature and their essence, and some people choosing to get closer to source. And that is the way through the next 1200-year transition period. That is the way into the age of Aquarius. This channel is called the Aquarian Shift. This is about the age of Aquarius, this new astrological age that we find ourselves in, an age when everything is changing and when we're having to find new ways of relating and new ways of being. The intersection between the Kali Yuga ending and the age of Aquarius beginning is simply just two timelines that are converging. What we do with that time, how we move through the space that we've been given, the incarnation that we occupy, that is what will write history. You can read history about the time from when Atlantis fell until now. Some of it, a lot of it has been lost. Let's start to write the next chapter of history. And let's let that be a chapter where we're leading by the heart, where we're helping each other, where we're moving into an ascension of consciousness. So that's my message. I really just wanted to get this out there. I really hope that you will take a look at this book. I am not a sponsor of this. I am just a believer in these teachings, and I have just found this book to be very, very fascinating. I want to end this video by giving some technology and something that I think will help us as we're going through this transition, and that is a mantra. And I'm going to do a separate video where I get deeper into the history and the technology around this mantra. But we were given a mantra, prana apana, shushmana hari, harihar, 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 hadi. This is a mantra that will help you when the elements have turned against you, when a natural disaster is upon us, when the elements are encroaching upon us, and when we need help from the cosmos to fight the elements. The prana apana mantra will help you with that. We have been chanting this in LA since the fires started. Actually, chanting it before that, I was taught this mantra several times. We had a hurricane, Hurricane Hillary, that was supposed to cause a lot of damage in LA. We chanted this mantra when that was going on. That turned out to not be that big of a thing. I'm not saying the mantra is the only reason, but I've heard many stories of people who have chanted this mantra and they've found their way through really difficult circumstances. When I was going to class this past Tuesday, I first of all saw the Hollywood Hills catch fire as I was driving to class. Parked my car, walked into Babaji, and my teacher got us started chanting this mantra and had to leave because his house was very close to where the fire broke out. Thankfully, his house was okay, and that fire was put out relatively quickly. The firefighters did an amazing job putting out that Runyon Canyon Hollywood Hills fire. I believe by the next morning it was out, and many yogis were chanting this prana apana mantra. So for now, I'm just going to play this mantra, and I'd like for you to just listen to it and let this get into your psyche a little bit. I'm going to do a separate video where I talk more about this, and we'll do a meditation with it together. But if you are wondering what you can do to help, there's plenty of places online that will talk about resources that you can send, donations, etc. Definitely do that if you know people who've been affected and they have GoFundMes or whatnot. Donate to those. I've done several of those. But just as you're going through the day, what can you do to help? Prayer, if that's something that resonates with you, and also chanting this mantra. Like, this is literally what we need. We need everybody chanting prana apana right now. That's what's going to not just get us through these LA fires, but if everybody was chanting prana apana, I'm pretty sure these next 1,200 years, this pyrosis hypothesis that Bibhu puts out, pretty sure that would go a lot more smooth. So let's just get into some prana apana. I'm going to play. This is Prem Amrit is the musician who put this version out. And if you don't know the words, just hum along. You'll get them eventually. We'll do this for like 3 minutes. Just close your exhale. So that's the prana apana mantra. Check back probably tomorrow. I'm going to do a video. There's a great meditation that we'll do for 11 minutes, and I'll talk more about the meaning of the words and what was said about the mantra when it was given. But prana apana, that is our mantra as we go through this ending of Kali Yuga, and just hold in our hearts and keep faith that things are going to get better as we get better. So with that, thank you so much for tuning in and for joining. May the long-time sun shine upon you, all love surround you, and the pure light within you guide your way on. Satnam.